Usually, I guess the stairs are pretty deep down, and so Billy, when it's nice out, I'd rather take him out the door, but unless it's winter, the stairs are up to.
Okay, we are good to go. Bible.
I don't know all these times I've got to school that way, in the basement, so, are you ready? Down there? Yeah, right, get out, don't go up the hallway.
Didn't turn out to be as serious as
Daytime
Last year, down taking that, she could watch the Sean. We have to check how you got home. Carry your car. We get to school like. She wasn't, tell me, last year she was
but they had to put them so when you're traveling, you may have insurance or Medicare or anything like that. But they stay for it's just a rest. And you see some insurance and Medicare doesn't apply. You have to have the main thing is well, but
All right, it's that time.
yeah, I didn't sell it full time. Well, I helped sell it.
All right, good morning, everyone. It's that time. 7 minutes past. My normal start time. If Virgil taught, it'd be a little closer to 9, if not exactly at 9. But nonetheless, we are in 1 Peter, if you'd like to turn there. 1 Peter chapter 1. We are going to try to cover 3 verses today. That's quite an accomplishment if we manage to pull it off. Now, if you've been in our daytimer study on Tuesday, we've been covering lots of verses, haven't we? Like sometimes 6, 7, 8, 9 at a time. Because if you read Mark, it's very action-oriented. Peter's more teaching, doctrine-oriented, so we're going to take our time here. All right. Would somebody read 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 14 through 16?
As obedient children, do not be conformed to the form of lust which were yours in your ignorance. But like the Holy One who called you, be holy yourself also in all your behavior, because it is written, "You shall be holy, for I am holy."
Thank you, Jim. Sometimes you read a verse that's so plain, so obvious, that your eyes can just kind of glaze over it. You think, well, I know that. You know, I know to be obedient to God. I know not to be conformed to the world. But I was trying to think about this more specifically. And in our culture right now, there's a lot of debate in the wider Christian circles, using that term loosely, about how Christians should relate to the world. Now, the good news is the scriptures don't have a lack of things to say about this, or a lack of examples. You know, in the Old Testament, we have the story of Balaam, who decided that he would act worldly. We know how that ended. We have the story of Simon the sorcerer in Acts chapter 8. We know how that ended. We have the story of Demas. We know how that ended. The truth is, a Christian life cannot match or be like a worldly life. It just can't. If there's not specific things that are different, marketably different, obviously different to anyone, then we're doing something wrong. Talking to my children yesterday, my teenage kids with jobs, we have a lot of conversations about how to act in the workplace. Because if you don't join the crowd that's gossiping, if you don't join the crowd that's cussing, if you don't join the crowd that goes to drink after work, who parties on the weekends, who, does the things that the world typically does, and people do that stuff in droves. What I'm amazed by is my teenage kids will come home and tell me a story of how a parent of 2 children went out and got drunk over the weekend. Like, we're not just talking about teenagers and young adults. We're talking about parents who still haven't grown up, who decided to have kids but not be parents. Because I don't know about you, but there's not a moment to be out of your mind when you're a parent. There just isn't. And so the problem is, though, that when you don't act like the world, you don't do those things, even just one of those things, you stick out. And then you got to figure out how to cope with that. And when you're a teenager, that's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of judgment coming your way. And so we talk about how, like, one thing I've been discussing with my children recently is that sometimes you have to purposefully shrink your circle of friends. Do you know what I mean by that? Stop being concerned that you have 5, 10, 15, 20 friends. Be content with 1 or 2 really good ones. Because sometimes you don't have the luxury of having 5 or 10 Christian friends at the same time. You just don't. You're fortunate to have 1 or 2. Now in this church, I'm fortunate to have 150, sometimes more. We're a church that gets along and really loves each other. And so that's another thing. And I know I'm kind of rambling here, but that I'm talking about my kids. But I keep emphasizing the importance of keeping church in their life. Because when you get out on your own, it's so easy to think, I'm going to sleep in on Sunday morning. Or I'm going to do something else on Sunday morning. But boy, that's exactly what Satan wants to do, is divide and conquer. If he can get you away from the church, he can corrupt you so fast. Because the church serves the purpose of not only being an encouragement in your life, but also sort of an accountability. It's hard to come to church with a guilty conscience and be determined to stay there. The Lord has a way of working through his people. So now that I've rambled, what do you all think about that? How a Christian life cannot match a worldly life, and what that's like. Maybe what it's like where you're at. Or am I making you think too hard at 9 in the morning?
I have become such a minority.
Yes. Yes. Isn't that the sad truth? Yeah. Even a lot of older adults feel peer pressure to do the things that worldly older adults do. It's not just teenagers that face peer pressure. Everybody does. Especially if you're in a worldly workplace. I think that's a lot where that comes from. Good thought. Anyone else?
When on Sunday morning sometimes you're tired and you thought, I don't have it in me to go. But you make yourself go because it's so easy to fall in that pattern and not go. That, no matter when you don't feel quite good, get up, get going.
Okay, I like where you're going with this. One thing that was taught to me very early on, and I've tried to take very seriously as a parent, is whatever I take seriously, my children will only take half as seriously. So if I half-bake church, by the time they grow up, they won't go at all. But there's always some degradation of signal, so to speak, over time. And so even if I'm all 100% sold out, I have to expect that my children are not going to get all of that from me. They're going to have to develop some of it themselves. So I've got to do my best to be as faithful as possible to give them the best possible chance of being the same way. Because if you do half-bake it, then they don't think it's important at all. Or if you prioritize sports or prioritize whatever on Sundays now, then that's what they'll prioritize. It's that simple. And here's a secret. Preachers feel the same way sometimes. It's not like you're superhuman when you're a preacher and you always feel like being in church. No, it's not always true. You may not feel that well, or maybe you're just exhausted, or, in the case of recently, I know Richard feels this, and when you're burying 3 friends in 2 weeks, that's really hard. It's very emotional. It's very draining. But one thing I love about this church, and I know I keep bragging about this church, but it's really true, is that every time I come here, I feel better leaving than I did coming. You come in drained, if you're honest. I mean, the week, the world, everything drains you. You know, I come here and when I leave, I feel better because I've been around people who encourage, you know, and that's huge. You know, and we're all trying to be on the same page, even if we're not on the same page all the time. Yeah, Linda.
Well, I know in the past, Stephen, I used to sing a lot of Lord Cable one night a week, or not, one night a month. And there were nights I just didn't feel like going, because that time I was working. But we'd go ahead and go. And I always felt that after I'd been there.
Yeah.
It lifted me up.
Right. You know, we were a handful of us went to Lock Haven this past Thursday, and a new couple came with us, and they wrote me an email later and said, you know, we didn't know if we should come, we didn't know if we wanted to come, but boy, are we glad we came. Yeah, and all we did was sing, and I preached a little bit. But you know, it's amazing when you give to others, sometimes that fills you up. Yeah, absolutely. And those people, oh man, I got to peer in the door a couple of times real fast to the residents. We had to do it through a window, okay, so it was hard to see each other. But they were so happy to see us. I mean, even though we were 25 feet from them, I mean, they were so happy to see us. So that just made your day, you know, making 20 people happy who haven't seen the outside world in 9 months. Yeah, for sure. Any other thoughts on that? Richard?
I wanted to piggyback on what Janet said about it's so easy to get discouraged when we look around us and we see so many crowds that are doing evil things, and we think about our kids. I try to remind my kids, Matthew chapter 7, beginning of verse 13. Jesus taught us that the gate is narrow, enter by the narrow gate, he said, for the gate is wide and the way is broad that leads to destruction, and many are those who enter by it. But the next verse, you really need to get this into your mind. For the gate is small and the way is narrow that leads to life, and few are those who find it. So we shouldn't expect to see a mad dash for Jesus. It didn't happen when he was here, even after he rose. There'll be a lot of people saved, no doubt. But we need to remember that it's going to be one of those walks. It's kind of lonely, unfortunately, for all of us. And it's getting worse. I mean, I don't need to tell anybody that. Just looking around at you see it everywhere.
Yeah, oh, it's so true. Yeah. One thing I was talking to my sons about recently. Now, I'm going to say something that's an opinion, okay, and I just want your feedback. My dad told me as a young man, he said, son, there's going to be times in your life you're not going to have friends, but remember your wife always needs them. That was something he told me. Now, maybe you agree with that or don't. This is not Bible, okay, this is just opinion. But I never forgot that, because I think what he was really telling me was put her first. Make sure she's got her friends first. Then you have time for yours. And that's part of being a leader in a family, is putting others first. So the reason why I was talking to my sons about this is because when you're thinking about, you know, marriage and family and future, you've got to be in a mindset where you're ready to be second. You're ready to not be the most important person in your life. If you are, then you're one step closer to being ready for that. But if you enter marriage thinking this is about me and what I want, that's going to end very badly. Leaders can't be that way. So if y'all have any thoughts on that, I just thought I'd share it and leave it open. But
This is going back to like living the worldly life. Like as a teenager, maybe you have more like of your to do these things. I think as an adult, it's more of like a worldly mindset, like to complain or to look out for myself first, and like so your advice, I think, as an adult is not maybe the actions, but just like how we're viewing the world and making decisions.
yeah.
It's more of a challenge.
I like how you bring up the complaining thing. I have fallen into that trap before, where you get pessimistic and you just start listing off all the negative things. One thing I've learned is if you want to find fault, if you want to find negativity, you can always find it. You want to pick somebody apart, everybody's got flaws. So just go at it, but that's only going to destroy things. That doesn't help anybody. The Bible even talks about don't be a fault finder. And that goes right along with not being a complainer. One thing you learn about the book of Numbers is if you read it carefully, is that almost all of Israel's travesties and tragedies that happened to them in the book of Numbers resulted from one thing. They complained and God got tired of it. I mean, sometimes people died because they complained. And I tell you, that is a sharp reminder for me. And I'm an optimistic person, but sometimes I can fall into that trap like anybody. So good thought, Amy. Anybody else? All right. Well, the second part of that verse talks about former lust. That says it's, I was thinking about this. Look how it puts it. Former lust which were yours in your ignorance. I was thinking, well, that's kind of a possessive word, your. Everybody's got a different, Mr. Reese at Central used to put it this way. Everybody has their favorite sin. The one they fall back on. The one they go to when they decide it's time to be stupid. That's how I put it to my teenagers. Everybody's got their own version of this, but they're all bad. You know, it's easy to look at somebody else's former lust and think, well, that's worse than mine, so I'm okay. The comparison game is deadly. Instead, the point of the verse is that don't do any of it. Don't be conformed to any of it, yours or anybody else's. The idea is to get away from all the former lust. And then the reason why we have those former lusts is because back before our Christian lives, we were ignorant of righteousness. We were ignorant of goodness. One of the reasons why I think you see the craziness you do in the streets right now is that a lot of people don't know anything else. That's their entire knowledge base is ignorance. If you've been taught from birth that there is no God, that you're evolved from a monkey, and nothing really ultimately matters, then anything is permissible. Alexander Pope, hundreds of years ago, said, in that case, what is might is right. Otherwise, if you got the power, do it. And that's how a lot of people are behaving right now. And we have a whole generation now who knows nothing about church. Nothing. And what they are told is false. Or what they learn is from late night television. And that ignorance feeds into this conformity to these former lusts and this, as Paul puts it, enslavement to sin. And boy, is that a miserable life. Anybody have any thoughts on that? I see a lot of head nodding like, yep, that sounds right. So what's the cure for that? What helps? I know when I go into the jail and I'm talking to guys who know absolutely nothing about the Bible, is, first of all, I have to take a patient approach. If you try to, like, my wife is really good at telling people the truth, but really bad about expecting them to accept it immediately. And she works in a prison. So she's learned over time is that you can tell people the truth, but it takes time for them to absorb it, if they ever will. You know, it's not a guaranteed thing. And so there has to be a patience, there has to be a kindness attached to that truth.
Well, isn't that like people that are kind of non-believing? The best way you can teach them is what they see in you and your actions.
Boy, is that true. So, let's go there. Because I've made this mistake. Let's say I'm in Walmart. Let's say it's pre-pandemic where you're not wearing a mask, okay? I've caught myself sometimes in Walmart walking around with a frown on my face. Well, anybody who, and I'm a relatively known figure because of my former business, and so if somebody sees me, they know I'm a preacher now, and I'm walking around Walmart and I look just as miserable as everybody else, does that look like something somebody wants to talk to or be around? No. When I lived in Moberly, I lived in Moberly for 3 years. I had a mission to try to make the greeters at Walmart smile, and I never succeeded. And so I've never forgot that. And so now I really try to make a conscious effort. Just because I'm going into Walmart to buy, juice or something, I need to be exuding the joy and the hope and the peace that I have in Christ. That needs to be evident on me. Because people don't want to talk to somebody who's walking around frowning. They just don't. They're not attracted to that. Why would they want a miserable faith?
You can't see their face very well anyway.
Not right now. That's what I'm saying. Pre-pandemic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Can't you tell them in their eyes?
Sometimes.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah, if you got angry eyes, you know. Yeah, that's not good. You know, and I'm like anybody else. You know, something dumb could have happened, and you're annoyed. But man, I've had to learn. No, that's temporary. I've got this eternal peace and joy and hope, and I need to be exuding that. You know. Also, confidence that my faith can, supersede those things.
Did you ever walk in the door at Walmart in Macon when Dorothy Holman was over there?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Her smiles,
Oh yeah.
She was
Always.
always.
She made me think that I want that to be my retirement job. That'd be a lot of fun. I would really enjoy that.
She did enjoy it.
Oh, and she had different outfits and hats, and yeah, she was a lot of fun. Yeah. People like that sometimes make the world go around. Yeah. Any other thoughts?
And then there are those people that go in there and think, how can anybody be that happy?
Yes! And then you know what you can do? Let me tell you. Let me tell you all about it. You know? And okay, going back to the jail. A lot of the guys in jail have kids, even though they're not fathers.
Her father, but they're not a dad.
Yeah, they're not. But most of them, believe it or not, feel at least some degree of guilt about it. Mainly because they were that kid once and now they're doing the same thing again. And so I do use my kids in a generic sense, of course not by name, but I use my kids in a generic sense to say, look, one of the reasons why my kids are functional in this crazy world is because of Christ. Because I've taught them these things. And we are in church every Sunday. And when you make that the centerpiece of your life, God takes care of that craziness. It's not that I've done it, it's that He's done it through me and my wife. And that can really speak to a dad who's like trying to figure out, how do I have any kind of relationship with my child that's positive? How do I make it better than the failure my father was? Well, it begins with Jesus. It absolutely does. And that can be a very powerful witness. So I tell my kids all the time, whether or not you like it, you're in the spotlight. Being a preacher's kid puts pressure on you, and I get it. Which is why you got to come talk to me before the pressure gets to be too much. You know?
As far as being sad or showing your emotions that you're not in a good mood. Recently, at a softball game in Macon, we were playing Marceline and we were losing. And they came off the field, and one of the girls was really showing how upset she was. But one of the cheerleaders on the bench, Chesney Smith, it would be Rick McVicker's granddaughter. She's a light bulb. She walks up behind her and slaps her on the back and says, "Are we happy?" That girl just kind of ignored her. She couldn't crack a smile. But are we happy?
Okay, true story. This is not a boast. Jonathan's very first basketball game in 4th grade, they lost 45-0. And I mean, I'm not a sports guy. I didn't care, really, but I didn't understand how much it would affect everybody else. That really got them down, you know. Well, the second game, they lost 45-3. And I suggested, let's all go to Pizza Hut after the game. And they said, everybody was so down still. I said, no, we scored. We need to celebrate that. And, you know, it changed the whole mood. You know, we had a good time. We did. Yeah. And you know what? If you can't win, celebrate what little victories you got.
Amen.
Well, I know when Carson was in, playing basketball at Macon, they played Brookfield one night, and Brookfield was losing horribly. But their coach kept going up and down, "Come on, guys, you're doing good." I mean, most of them would have sat on the bench and thrown their down, but I really admired him for encouraging those kids.
That was a coach.
Yes, that was.
A good coach recognizes when he can't win, so make the best of it. Yeah, sometimes you can't win. We played a game when I was a kid where we played I went to a Christian grade school, and I don't know how we ended up in this tournament with a bunch of public schools that were much larger than us. And we played a team out of Peoria that beat us 88-12. And they did a full court press on us the entire game, like totally unnecessary. But apparently this was a basketball prep school. Like they treated every game as the end of the world. Well, about halfway through the game, our coach, when we went to the locker room, he was a Christian man, and he said, guys, we need to understand that this is not personal. This is how they play basketball because they're preparing to be competitive. This isn't our world. So here's my suggestion to you. Everybody gets a chance to throw the ball from the half-court line. Let's see if we can score. So it was just somebody's different turn every time. And we made like 2 of them. So that was like super fun. Like it suddenly changed the game from trying to like not lose so badly to just see who can hit a half-court shot. And so I never forgot that. That was a lot of fun. Yeah, absolutely. Good story. Thanks, Janet. All right. Anyone else? Hosea 4:6. You don't have to turn there. I have it written down on your sheet. It says, "My people perish for lack of knowledge." One of the things that Marie Miller taught me was the more Bible that's in your head, the easier it is to obey. She had a lot of scripture memorized. She had a lot of hymns memorized. So that whether she needed to tell herself something from the Bible or sing a song, she could either lift her spirits or inform herself as to what she should do next. And, the lessons I've learned from these people. Like one of the greatest benefits, so to speak, of being a preacher, if you really take your calling seriously, is how much you can learn. Because when you're my age, let's say you're 38 and you're in any other field almost, you're not around a lot of elderly people. So I'm kind of in a unique position in that I am around a lot of elderly people. Nobody in this room, of course. And so I get to spend time with them and I get to learn from them. And also, one thing it's done for me that I never thought about before is it's made me think about my own mortality. Because when you're around old age and death on a regular basis, it's sobering. It makes you realize, this is going to happen. Better be ready, right? And I don't think many other people have that benefit in their work. So that's been very useful for me. And I've been grateful for that. And also the attitude you can have facing death. Marie was looking forward to seeing the Lord every time. It's something we talked about every time for the past couple of years. And, it doesn't have to be a negative thing if you don't make it a negative thing. All right, any other thoughts? We're having a good discussion today. Everybody's come alive. I like that. So this verse here. Any other thoughts on this? My people perish for lack of knowledge. We have more access to Bible and Bible study tools than we ever have, and I think people know less about the Bible than they ever have. I think to some degree you just take it for granted, right? The Bible's always there, it's always online, it's always on your phone, it's always available, so I guess we're good. I know I can fall into that trap. You think, well, I can look it up. I don't have to have it up here. But boy, when it's up here, it sure makes a bigger difference. When it's just muscle memory, when it's automatic. There's no replacement for memorization. Psalm 46:10, my favorite verse. Be still and know that I am God. And that's a verse that has calmed me down in a lot of situations. And when it hasn't, it's not the verse's fault, it's mine. All right, let's look at verse 15. But like the Holy One who called you, be holy yourselves also in all your behavior. This is a good opportunity to review how words work. And I don't want to get boring or academic. But a word can have a literal definition, and then it can have what's called a semantic definition. A literal definition, for example, for holy just means to be separate. That's its literal definition. But in the Bible, it carries an extra meaning, a semantic meaning, which is righteousness. There's a separate righteousness that God is inviting us to. It's a righteousness that sets us apart from other people. You see this example in the Old Testament with Israel. God set Israel apart and gave them a law to be righteous in anticipation of the coming Messiah. And so we too are a holy priesthood set apart. 1 Peter will talk about this in chapter 2. To be obedient to God, to serve His purposes. And sometimes it's easy to forget that God's number one character trait is righteousness or sinlessness. God could not be God unless He was 100% sinless all the time. That's a necessary requirement to be God, which is why there's only one God. And we are called to be set apart by following that example. Because if you're holy and righteous in this world, you're going to be set apart. It's sort of an automatic function of it. There's no getting away from it. And so a lesson that, again, going back to my teenagers, you can't ever forget that our behavior does matter. And I'd add on to that and say our attitude does matter. One question I asked down below is it possible to do the right thing with the wrong attitude? Yeah. Yeah. And that can, like, even though we're doing the right thing, how it affects others can be very, very negative. You know, I've had to learn with my kids that I have to not only do the right thing, but I have to have the right attitude, or they're actually turned off by the right thing. You see what I mean by that? Another example, and this was something that my parents were really good at, and I've passed it on as a tradition to my kids, and I hope they'll do the same. Anytime we have a baptism in this church, we go out for ice cream. It's what we've done for years. So my kids associate positive memories with somebody else's baptism, you know, to be happy for them that this happened. Now that they're older, I usually have to, like, take them out to eat. You know, it's not so easy now. But, in fact, now let me brag on my daughter. Last time we did that, she stole the bill and went and paid for it. And I was like, wow, that's really cool. I don't know the last time I ever got a free meal. So, well, of course, I get a free meal here like every week. That's ridiculous. But daytimers and other things. But the point is, I was just really touched by that. So we got to do the right thing with the right attitude. One time when I was a kid, Westside Christian Church, big church, 1,700 people, and this was before I was a Christian, so I didn't care very much. But I remember there was like 10 baptisms that Sunday, and that takes a long time. And my parents stuck around the whole time. Like half the church left before it was over, which I think is sad, but it happens. Well, we stuck around the entire time, which added like a good 45 minutes to the service time. Well, my parents were not restaurant eaters. They did not eat out hardly at all. So, but my dad said, kids, we're going to go celebrate 10 baptisms. We're going to go out to eat. And boy, I tell you, everybody just lit up. And there was this restaurant called Mavericks, which was kind of like a Colton's in Kirksville. And I loved buffets, and I never got to go to a buffet, so it was super exciting. So I tell you, I was really happy about them 10 baptisms, and to this day I am. So those are just good examples of what I learned from my parents. And they were first-generation Christians, or at least my dad was. And so for them to associate that, to have that wisdom, it's really cool. So I recommend you do the same. You know, establish some kind of tradition anyway that associates your faith with positive memories. What else can we talk about when it comes to righteousness or sinlessness? Any thoughts on this? Holiness? One last thought I put on there was perfection is the goal, aiming is the way. We're never going to be perfect on this earth, but the point isn't to reach the goal on this earth. Our point is to keep aiming towards the goal on this earth, so when we get there, we can get there. You see what I mean? Aiming is, I think, sometimes underestimated. Dave Ramsey says in one of his books about money that people with goals accomplish 33 times more than people who don't have goals. Just simply having a plan and shooting towards something makes all the difference. You know, we're going to mess up. And something I tell my kids too is, look, you know, you've seen me do the wrong thing, say the wrong thing. The important thing is that we recognize repentance is the path back to goodness. It's the path back to happiness. It's not in the moment it's conviction and difficulty and shame, but it leads to joy. And I've got to be aiming towards that. I've got to have my sights set towards that, even if I miss from time to time. You know, that's just the way it works. Well, anybody else have any thoughts? All right. Well, verse 16. We're actually going to get through all 3 verses. Boy, I tell you. Because it is written, you shall be holy, for I am holy. So I got 3 points out of this, and if you have any others, let's talk about them. We are to be righteous and holy because it is required. One thing that I've had to learn in my Christian walk is sometimes I don't know why God's told me to do something. And it's kind of like, again, he's the parent and I'm the child. It's not always important, I know why. But it is important I obey. You know, one rule I've had with my kids since they were real little is, if you want to argue about what you're about to do, you obey first, then we'll have a discussion. And you know what's funny? There's almost never a discussion. Because the point wasn't they really had a good reason not to do it. They just didn't want to do it. The discussion was a delay tactic. That's all it was. And I think that's the way it is too with our faith with the God. Sometimes in the Bible, we read something, we're like, oh, I don't want to do that, or how in the world am I going to do that, or why should I do that? And because we can't rationalize it to ourselves, we just don't do it. But that's not the way it works. We are to be holy and righteous because it's required. Even if we don't understand why we do or do not do something, we're still obligated. There's an old rule in law that is, even if you don't know the law, you're still liable to it. You know, ignorance is not an excuse. At least that's the way it used to work in our culture. It doesn't seem to work that way anymore. Another point is we are to be righteous and holy because God is. That's the goal. Because He's righteous and holy, that's how we're supposed to be. And then C, we are to be righteous and holy because it's best for us. Doesn't always feel like it at the time, does it? But over time, you know, when we did our move 5 years ago, that was a really awful year. Like that, 2015 and 2016 was terrible for our family. And really all the way through 2016 up until the beginning of 2017. That was a really rough year and a half. But I look back now, and I'm so glad it happened. I'm so glad it happened. It brought our family closer together than it ever has. Because we had to struggle together to make it work. And it was tough. But boy, am I glad we went through that. And I wouldn't be the novice carpenter and mechanic I am now if it weren't for all that. I never even would have tried. You know, and necessity is the mother of invention, right? When you have to do something, suddenly you'll figure out how. You know, God knew what it would take to motivate me. Truth is, it's best for us. You know, He knows what's best for us. And boy, it can be a trial in the meantime. Anybody else have any thoughts on why we are to be holy and righteous? These are just the three I came up with. All right. Well, here's just some other thoughts, and we can conclude our lesson. We already talked about A, can we do the right thing but with the wrong attitude? How about the next one? Can we do the right thing but with the wrong motivations? Yeah? That can be tempting in ministry. Your motivation sometimes can be, well, if I do this, this person will do that for me. That's not the right motivation. Now, sometimes that might happen. But if you go into, and I think Richard could tell you this too, if you try to do the right thing with the wrong motivations, it'll backfire. It'll become evident that you're not there for them. You're not there for God. You're there for you. And that's really bad. You know, there's uncomfortable situations in every workplace. You know, everything you have to do. And so it can be easy to go in with the wrong motivation. But that'll backfire. C, can we do the right thing but still have bad consequences? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. In fact, sometimes that's why we don't want to do the right thing, because we know what it's going to result in. And that is, that's tough. You know, that's why the phrase exists, and it's always been true and it always will be true. No good deed goes unpunished. Oh, man. And that, another thing you got to teach your kids is that sometimes you do the right thing, people will hate you for it. That's just a sad fact. And your ability to accept that shows maturity. Anybody have a thought on that? Felt like somebody did. Well, Matthew 6, 3 and 4. This was a verse I thought of. But when you give to the poor, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving will be in secret, and your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. This is something I've had to learn with maturity as an adult, is that sometimes you just do something nice for somebody, and you make sure nobody else knows. And that's trusting God, right? That He'll see what you're doing and, you know, trust Him. And when you're first giving, I think as a young Christian, you almost kind of want somebody to know. But it's so important to learn how to just give and realize that's the Lord's money and I'm letting go of it. And that's tough. It's tough at first. But look at what it says there. The Father who sees you, so somebody sees you, God does, the most important person, He will reward you. And I have found that to be so true. In fact, I have found, and I think Richard told me this a long time ago, you can't outgive God. Go ahead and try. Malachi 3 says, give and see that your cup does not overflow. Test me in this. It's the only time God ever says you can test him. Boy, is there truth to that. Richard?
Right here in this church, back in the 80s, we had a man come and share a vision for ministry that his name was Wayne King. And he started an organization called Deaf Missions. And the way that came about was his preacher at his church, one of his elders at his church, asked him to go down the street. He gave him an envelope with money in it. He said, I want you to take this down the street to this little house and give it to the family there. I want you to tell them where it came from. Don't tell them it came from the church. Just say somebody asked you to give it to them. Don't tell them it was me, because he was the landlord of these people. Anyway, Gwen went down to the house, and he gave testimony in his church about this, and the church supported him for years, and they still support him, I don't know, but anyway, when he got down there, knocked on the door, nobody would answer the door, he'd hear people inside. Pretty soon a little girl came to the door, and she kept making noises he couldn't understand, and then an older girl came, and she could speak. Reluctantly, but she could speak and wanted to know what he wanted. He told her, someone gave me this and asked me to bring it down to you. And he realized the entire family, mother, father, and 4 kids were all deaf, except for this one girl. And he said when he left there, he was profoundly affected by the idea, what do the deaf people do when they can't read the Bible, they don't understand any of it. You can get a Braille Bible, but they were very rare. Now this would have been 1984, 5, somewhere around there. And just to show you how this played out, he decided to start Deaf Missions. He left the located ministry, started Deaf Missions. And just this past month, we got a letter from them, because we've been supporting them for years. They finally completed the entire Bible in video. Every story in the Bible, everything in the Bible is on disc now, where you can watch the whole thing played out with sign language. All the actors are doing their parts with sign language. And it's a major milestone.
That's massive.
So now the deaf people have a Bible in sign language. All because somebody gave them secret.
Wow. That reminds me, there was a news story yesterday. I'll end with this. And I'm not making any political comments about this, but one of the new law clerks for Amy Coney Barrett is completely blind. And she gave a testimony using Braille on how she does her job as a professional law clerk. And I just thought, man, the people who invented that stuff and made it possible has made brilliant minds like that able to work. You know, just because she has such an obvious disability, I mean, I can think about some of my, flaws, and I think, man, it's so cool that that's possible. So that's great.
It's a neat story because
Yeah.
we were touched as a church.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe some of the folks here remember that, Linda or Jim. They developed a song, a modern Christian style song for the 80s. And they played the song and he signed it. And I was so moved by that. And now after, I think it's 30 years, he and his wife are very old now. She's got health problems. And he's no longer the director. He's got a deaf person who's the director of this ministry. And it's just remarkable to see something in my lifetime come to that kind of fruition. And now those people have the entire Bible on a video, watching it acted out by actors, and it's all professionally done.
That's awesome. That's really cool.
It's like having the 10 Commandments, the old movie we saw years ago. Each one of those stories acted out like that, and everybody does it sound like
That's so cool. That's great. Well, God's working, ain't he? All right, very good. Well, let's close out. Sorry it took a few more minutes than usual. I don't usually do that, so I apologize. We got through the whole sheet, though. All right. Alex, would you close us in prayer?
Father, thank you for allowing us to be able to be here today and be able to talk about worship you and study the word. Just be with us as we go about the service and throughout the rest of our day. Love you in Jesus Christ's name I pray. Amen.
Amen. All right. And Rebecca, thank you for being here. Appreciate it. Yeah.
And all that fireman did?
Never mind her being here. I'm glad she's here. Anytime. Never a problem. All righty.
Not a lot of problem.
All right.